Hi all. Hello, hello, hello. Are you there? Kiwi to Earth, Kiwi to Earth. Hi all. Starting a little bit behind schedule this morning, 5 minutes or so, because of a little getting the ablutions done and a little bit of an emergency going on there. Phil, good to see you. Top of the morning to you. Wonderful to have you up as first thing. Anyway, I thought we'll have a little bit of a preamble just kicking into this one this morning just to allow people to get on board. And as I said, a little bit of delay this morning getting started, doing my morning ablutions, and wouldn't you know it, the fire alarm goes off. So I'm like a mouse around the house, and I don't think the missus appreciated the fire alarm going off, to be honest. I suspect I'll wear the consequences of that a little bit later on. Hey, but for you guys, I'm up first thing in the morning for us here, 7 o'clock here, and I know it's, in most cases, it's Sunday night where you are. So today, 3 things I'm going to cover off. A little bit of an intro, follow up on yesterday, and number 2, we're going to talk about acrylic paints, and the third thing is we're going to expose a bit of flesh. We're just going to get started on that. Not me, okay, we're going to talk about flesh. I thought we'd focus the conversation around acrylic paints on flesh, and since it really is the thing that differentiates figures from everything else, I thought it's probably the best place to start. Now I wanted to thank Marcus White for the request about acrylics, and Andrew last night, some questions around shading and light, and just generally some questions around flesh. I thought it'd be really useful. Right, let's have a quick look on who's on board. Already said hi to Phil. Hope the lad joins soon, mate. Kev, nice to see you. Nap. Johannes, good morning. Welcome. And of course, we've got John. Lovely to see you, mate. Thanks very much for the support. Really appreciate it. Going over 1,500 odd views on those first 3 videos, so people seem to be enjoying them. This one should be around that 30 minute, maybe slightly longer, just depending on the topics, but I am trying to keep it at 30 minutes, so please just bear that in mind, and people do join throughout the call, and we'll just have to see how that goes. Leroy, welcome. Nice to hear from you, mate. Nice to see you on board here. Righto. And Andrew, good morning. Welcome, Andrew. Nice to have that conversation with you last night. Really appreciated the support, and wonderful to have you on board this morning. We're going to be talking about flesh and a little bit about acrylics, so that'll be a leader into our sessions that we'll have later on, Andrew. Hey, and Andy, you're finally here, mate. Man, what a treat it is to get you online. So that's Andy Belsey. I'm going to be looking at a new figure that I'm doing for Andy Belsey as part of the introduction section today. So I'm going to do a short introduction, then we're going to look at acrylic paints, and then we're going to start talking a little bit about flesh from acrylic paints. So I've got a bit of a palette laid out here, and we'll start looking at that shortly. Hi Leroy, where are you from, mate? Okay, just let that type away. Okay, so in terms of the introduction, like I said, really good support on those first few videos. Some good support just opening up on Patreon. And, you know, again, I do want to mention what I'm doing on Patreon. Now, Patreon is intended to be very much a personal connection. I'm realising that these YouTube, these Facebook sessions, which I am going to put onto YouTube later on, but for me, these Facebook sessions tend to be a bit one way. However, I'm getting a lot of interaction in between times, which are really helping introduce and connect me to what's going on and what you're after there. Masaya, nice to see you, my friend. Good morning. Arigato. And Chris, okay, Gibraltar. Leroy, awesome, fantastic. That's one place in the world I haven't been, would love to go. Went to Malta, but that was the sort of first place I've been to. And here's Robert. Nice to have you on board, mate. Thanks again for that opportunity to paint our little fleet air arm pilot. Hopefully this is useful for you, mate. And I've been really enjoying that little RFC fellow that you've been painting up recently. Righto. I have noticed that little, have you guys noticed that little tick that I do? I'm trying to, this video I'm going to try and get rid of that. let's see how that goes. So in terms of the introduction, done a little bit of that. I also wanted to do this little bit of preamble because I've realized it's just introducing. We're waiting for a few people to get on board. And when we get a magic number, we'll kick straight into those acrylics. Now, with regards to little Tommy that I did for Andy, little sleeping Tommy, aka Jimmy, completed him yesterday, and you'll see those photos online. And throw the old P in just to give a sense of scale on that. Hadn't come across that. I've come across that bit of an idea. Just a friend had asked me what size are the figures, and it really does give you a sense. Now, bear in mind that Nino's figures tend to be on the taller side of 54mm, or correction, 60mm, I'd say. They're 1/32, and working together, Tommies work really well with wingnut aircraft, and they go fantastically together, as Andy Belsey's shown in his trench scenes. And that's what I'm going to be working on today. Okay, there it goes again. At least I'm conscious of it. That's a start, and it's a little tick that I hadn't realised that I had. So we've hit the magic number, and we're going to kick into it. What we're going to look at today is we're going to look specifically at acrylic paints, and we're going to look specifically at flesh. And the little guy I've got on the bench there, that I'll show you in a second, hasn't been started, and he soon will be. Hey Fet, wonderful to see you there, mate. Really love your posts, really enjoy seeing what you got going on. Flesh painting, yeah, I am going to do that, Johannes. It really is just a starter today. Mikhail, hello, and Jeremy, awesome. Eric Rice, calling in Eric. Hopefully Eric gets a chance to join us a little bit later on. So I'm going to flip the camera over. I've got my little setup here. You'll see a couple of bits of blue tack on the wall. That's part of the trick to doing these things. Kia ora, morena to Fet. That's a little bit of Maori to those Kiwis that are actually up this early. Most of them will be up getting ready for work. Let's get into it, team. Righto, so on my bench tonight, and I've flipped this around so everything's in order. Let's just have a look at. So I don't want to scare you away. However, I do want to give you a sense of my approach to flesh. So what I'm going to do, I'm just doing a quick scan over the colours that I've laid out here. Right. And we're going to come back and we're going to look at those individually, get a feel for them. Now I'm also trying to relax a little bit. There's the Kiwi tripod stand at the back of the wall. Those couple of bits of blue or green tack. I think they are a bit of green tack that I got from a Swedish mate a few years back. May have been Mike Blank, may not have been. That stuff's amazing how long it's lasted. And there's a little fellow that we've got that we're looking at. I've got some special treats coming on for him a little bit later on, I'm hoping. But that's Andy's little conversion. It's a Tommy's conversion by Nino again. This is a pretty standard figure. However, it has been converted to be reading a map instead of the directions that he was giving. I've got another version of this I'm doing as a Maori officer, which I may well share with you later on in a few months. Notice Andy's whacked the helmet on that and rearranged the arms. I've done a little bit of fine tuning and refining before we paint them up. And then of course, for those that were joined me yesterday for the wet palette, here's that brand new wet palette that I made. Now point to Nap, don't have to put it in the fridge, mate. Not at all. That little baby, if done well, will be more than enough. Set up a couple of bright lamps. Just become daylight. I was a bit worried that it wouldn't be daylight here, but it is daylight. So we've got the wet palette, we've got the figure, we've got the lamps, we've got lots of paint. I'm only going to use one of those today. And we've got the painting array. Okay. Now we're going to focus primarily on paints to start with, acrylics. Let's quick check in. John, up early. Good to see you, man. And Alfonso, hola. Okay, in terms of paints, talking about flesh. Now, all of these colours here that I've shown you are all available for flesh painting. Now, I'm not too sure about sets. I'd love to buy a set of flesh paints, and I think it's particularly useful for starters. I've sort of accumulated these different ones in that quest for flesh. As I said before, flesh is definitely the thing that differentiates figures from everything else. Okay, all the other, if you think about the equipment, if you think about the groundwork, etc., it's exactly the same as you use for an aircraft, a tank, a truck, a motorbike, whatever. Even ships, full of metal, maybe not so much groundwork, although it's water. The thing that differentiates our guys is flesh. So the first one I'm going to talk about, you can buy off the shelf that Matisse flesh. Now I particularly like that Matisse flesh. Now I do have that tube. You can see that there. It's a very light colour, and I tend to use that as a base for female flesh. Very good colour. Now the reason I'm showing you all these tones is because I use a range of different colours depending on the mood that I'm trying to get with my figures. There's no one standard mix. There's no one standard mix for what I've got. Okay, I'm going to start from light to dark in terms of this. So we're just going to have a look at the Joe Sonia. The Matisse is beautifully smooth, very creamy texture, lovely stuff, professional acrylic artist oil. I don't know if you can get that, but I do really like that one. That comes out of Australia. Got to be good. Anzac Brothers and all. Don't know if any of them are up this early. Probably about 5 o'clock in the morning over there. But it is a nice creamy texture. Okay. In terms of the other colours that I've assembled here, and most of those Joe Sonias I've got on the bench, I'll probably use on the uncle here, or uncle, Andy's little fellow. So Naphthol Red Light, a nice red tone, and what I'm going to use that for is I'll use that just to brighten up his cheeks a little bit of red tone in there. Now I've got a skin tone base and a Naples yellow hue. There you can just see, hopefully you can see that coming through. That skin tone base is okay. I tend to use that for a more paler flesh, and it may work on this one, but it will be used as a base tone or a base colour, as will Naples yellow. So I tend to lay down a base and then I work on the top of it. Whatever that base is, I will actually build up. Now I've got yellow oxide, burnt sienna and sap green. So those are the colours that really add that sort of yellowish, slightly greeny tone. You wouldn't have thought that, but those colours are fantastic in terms of that combination and making that. Now, if you follow any of the Korean modelers, whether it's Youngbok, Sungwon or Minjin, or even Darren Han. Darren's a master painter, as many of you know, out of China. Those are the sorts of colours and tones that get that rich, yellowish, tanny tone coming into the figures. Okay, and they do use those paints, so they do use Joe Sonia. That's the ones to get a sense of that, and particularly useful. And then the shadow tones. So if these are the colour tones, these are the shadows I'm putting in. It's a mix of burnt umber and Payne's grey, and I will mix a little bit of that burnt umber with something like sap green to give it a little bit of a darker tone. Notice there's no black. So typically I wouldn't use a black in here unless it's the shadowing that goes around the collar, around the top of the head under his helmet, or around the cuffs. So tend not to use black in there. May use black as a little part of the eyes. Okay, so that's the Joe Sonia palette just sort of laid out there. Now I'll just take a minute to have a quick look at the questions that are coming in the comments. Say hi to everybody. Thanks, John. Looking great. Just off to work, mate. Have a safe day, man. Catch you later on. Guillermo. Hola. Hopefully I said that okay. I know pronunciation's not my strong point on this, mate, but I'm going to give it a go. Johannes. Michael, maybe I missed it. Are you going to use the wet palette? Yes, we're going to pop some colours on the wet palette, and I'll show you that in action. Hopefully you saw that yesterday. It'll just depend on time, mate. All right. And John, good to see you. Nice, thanks for that reply, yeah. John Graham, welcome. And Vittorio, hello. I need to look for that Joe Sonia paint. Mike, never heard of it before. Come on, John. Surely not. Every figure modeler worth their salt should know about Joe Sonia now. And it's not an advertorial. It's really was introduced to us by the Korean modelers. And in our case, we used to be able to get it in craft shops. So if you have a look at it, matte fluid acrylic, but you'll also, some of them notice, you'll notice it called gouache, which is a type of paint. Very good paint. And I think most of it actually was coming out of Australia too. Yeah, made in Australia, but available in, let me just have a quick look there. Yes. Zoom in, made in Australia, but contacts in the US, Europe, and Chroma Online. So the brand is chromaonline.com. So if you want to have a look at that, You know, these are craft paints originally. The texture just fantastic for acrylics. Now let's come into those traditional jobs. Let's have a look in here. So I will mix and match. So you know, I'm not saying Joe Sonia is the one you have to do and you have to stay with it. I will mix and match. Light's a little bit rough here. Let me just have a look. So we've got some Citadel or Games Workshop. These are the some of the new and some of the old. So a Santi Bone. I find that really good to provide a little bit of sheen. It's almost guaranteed to have sheen, but it's a beautiful highlight. So I'll either use a Santi Bone or Naples Yellow Hue to provide the highest highlights on flesh. And then we've got some elf flesh out of the. It is what it is. Nice soft tone. Again, probably for a feminine tone I tend to use that, or a younger man. Dwarf flesh, just a little bit up from that, a base coat. Probably dries a little bit too bright for me, but possibly for a base coat. And then scab red, providing a little bit of the red hue, particularly into the lips and base of the nose. Underneath the nose, typically you have a little red nose coming through, and those cheeks, of course. So Citadel, the primary purpose for Citadel that I use is when I want a good sheen by itself, so building up, and I tend to use them a lot for leathers. They're my go-to for leathers, but we'll talk about that another time. And then comes the old Vallejo. Now, there are definitely a couple of colours that I will be using today. So I won't do a figure with his eyes if I'm not using this little guy. Basic skin tone, right? That's a gimme. I will always use that as the base for eyes. So the whites of eyes, slightly pinkish, always that tone starts. It doesn't matter what scale I'm working in, from these little guys at 1/32 right through to 1/10, 1/6 scale. I'll use that as the basic tone for the eyes. Now here's, you know, my mate John Belcher was just on before. John's a fabulous painter from New Zealand, and he put me onto this little guy, beige red. Now that's a flesh can in a pack. And if you look at John's figures, you'll notice a little bit of beige red, particularly in those main tones. Now I use that on Jimmy, and as a quick flesh colour, that's certainly one that I'd go to on that. And in terms of browning, this is another suggestion of John, the Cavalry Brown. So he'll use that as a darker tone. So in here, what you've actually got is, if you've got a paint set, you'd probably have this as a basic tone. You'd have this as a mid-tone or the base, okay, and you'd have this as the shadow tone. That would suffice for most figures. And the trick is to actually use this predominantly, this in the highest areas, and this in the shadow or the darkest areas, okay? And I think that's just an important call out to make sure that you're aware of. And last but not least, this little red from Vallejo. Now I tend to use this one, or I actually prefer the red cadmium, which is a little bit darker tone. Just wait for a second, I'll grab that out of the box. Okay, here's a stash of them down on the floor here. Okay, there, I saw my favourite there. Righto, so that's the other favourite that I have. Probably should have popped them up a little bit earlier on. So for exposing flesh, this is the colour of lips. Okay, it is cadmium umber red. For those that are in Spanish, Rolo Cadmia Tostado. Good attempt, not really. But that's the colour that I tend to use for really dark tones. And I do always, not always, but typically I'll use that as a flesh tone, particularly for the top lip. The top lip's always in shadow, and that's a useful colour for that. It's also a nice colour to mix in to actually get a little bit of shadow under the chin and behind the ears. And as ears tend to be a little bit pinker, that's what I'll tend to use as the shadow within ears. Okay, so there's a little bit of a lineup. Now there is one little guy that I haven't put in place. Let me just get those along. You can see those reds are quite similar. Okay, just gives you a flavour of the types of colours you can have. Now you can mix and match all of those. Now the one that I haven't included here, and this is really a quick and easy one. This is the P3. So I don't have a lot of these, but I wanted to talk about this for a couple of reasons. This is called Flesh Wash. You can see there, Flesh Wash. Now I wanted to talk about that because it is possible to base coat with this sort of guy, beige red or your Matisse skin tone light there, and then just let that dry, 5-10 minutes, or speed it up with a hairdryer. I don't tend to use a hairdryer, but you could use that, or even some of these Joe Sonia base colours. And then you can actually just wash that over the top, and that'll give you a natural shadow. Now, some of the Citadel, I think there's like a wash product coming out of Games Workshop now, which essentially does that. It has a base and then it just lightens over the top. One of the catches with this this little guy, I tend to mix it into colours as opposed to wash it over the top, is that it's very runny. It's like water. It's got quite a heavy tone, and it tends to dry flat. So I don't want my flesh to ever be flat. So with all those paints, they're useful. In most cases, apart from the Games Workshop, I can't rely upon those to be a nice little bit of a sheen that I want to get for skin tones, and I use the sheen to differentiate that from flesh. I have there it is there, tuck that guy in, 2 additives that I always use, and Johannes, those are the 2 that I'll add to every single palette that I do for flesh. The glaze medium there will be using what I use to thin and to mix and to maintain and control consistency. And the satin varnish there, I just bought this bottle, pretty cool. I typically have those little size bottles, but I decided to experiment with this. What I've found is the satin varnish, it's quite a strong satin varnish, meaning that it is quite bright. It is quite shiny, and I do want to try and avoid having that too bright. However, when I say bright, it's more sheen than I typically like. So I did like the little bottle of a Velasco that came in that size, satin varnish. It tended to be just a little bit of sheen and not too much. This stuff, I've got to be careful. Sometimes it's a bit too much sheen. So what I typically do is I'll mix that into the paint. That's a key. I'll mix the varnish into the paint as I'm working it. And what will happen is if I find it too shiny, I'll actually cut it back. I'll just go native with one of the existing flesh tones that I'm using, and I'll use that sort of flat to get a bit of a balance there. Righto, let's have a quick look through, see who we've got on here before we get into it. Now I've got to say, Robert, awesome to see you, mate. Still loving those projects and loving that sort of retrospective that you're doing at the moment, mate. Let me just flick this back around so you can see who I'm talking to. Righto, so John, I'll never look at Joe Sonia Paints. Yeah, gotcha. Javier, hola. Spencer, awesome to have you here, mate. Now I can see I can bring you onto camera. We might have to have a chat about that. Might have to do a two-way conversation. Spencer is an inspiration, and an inspiration on doing this. Really love the relaxed tone and the topics that you've been doing, especially that retrospective or that looking back at Chet Pain. Such an influence for many of us. Okay, and Matt, good to see you again. Trust it's another nice day in LA there. And I am good, and I'm trusting you're going to be nice and safe out there. Gary, nice to meet you, mate. How you going? Johannes, we're just going into that. And hopefully that was useful, Johannes. I'm just really giving you a taste of things. Remember, I'm trying to keep this at 30 minutes. Now, you can probably get the impression I can talk on some of these topics for quite some time. And that's why I'm a little bit wary of, so I need to do that. And Kev, question here. That's fine, mate. Do you use blending medium or just glaze? Now I have been using blending medium. I did start with blending medium. That's Winsor & Newton blending medium, and I used to use that with my big figures, the 6 scale. You'll see some of you might be familiar with my Maury Sargent. And certainly in those earlier figures and the busts, I was using blending medium. I have tended to move to glaze for the smaller guys. It's just, I don't know, I was playing between them. Just nice and convenient, little bottle size, nice and handy. I've got it here. So either or, but I do tend to find the glaze a little bit thicker in consistency than blending medium, which is a little bit runnier. You need to be wary of it. And I did use the blending medium in a slightly different way. We might have a look at that a little bit later on, not today, but on another session. And Stu, nice to see you. Welcome. Where are you from, Stu? Yeah, it would be good. Righto, let's have a talk. So Johannes has been asking if I'm going to use the wet palette. Yep, for sure. Now I'm going to just get my my machine set up here, mate. It's amazing what you can do with the old iPhone, isn't it? In theory. So let me make sure it's not the wallpaper. Yeah, well spotted. I'm just getting it set up. Now what I want to try and do is you get a little bit of me. you get a little bit of mirroring, but you should get my bench here. And that's the mounting on the blue tack. Okay, good stuff. Okay, righto. We are ready to go. So I'm going to clear some of the stuff out. But what I'm really going to do, I've been thinking about this. Jimmy used a similar mix. So what I'm going to do, wet palette, righto. This is the one I made yesterday. Now there's a bit too much water in here. You can, for those that see, you might not notice, but there's a bit of water slushing around the bottom there. I don't like that. So that water is going to go into my reservoir. Correction, into my paint cleaning setup there, just so I don't have enough. So I know this is one for Andy Herbert picked up on this yesterday. The trick is not to have too much water. I don't like water slushing around. I like it to be touchable, and I don't want to see any water floating around on the top there. When I refresh that palette, and I know Kev, you asked about putting it in the fridge, you just don't need to, mate. You will find, depending on that lid, whether it's sitting loose there or it's clipped in, it will determine the amount of refreshing, the amount of evaporation that's going on. Remember, that's what's actually happening. It's got its own little atmosphere working inside there, and with the lid on, it's going to, if it warms up, a lot of water is going to come out of the base and sort of go into droplets on the top, and it'll form on top of the paper. I'm wary of that sometimes. However, it's also a useful pattern because you'll find the paint comes alive as well. Righto, so always the way I work is I typically have the wet palette with the lid underneath, and I just sit that down on the top there. Now, I have been thinking about this, and I'm thinking I'll come just as a call out to John, beige red that I spoke about, so Vallejo 70.804. Never do know the numbers. There's so many numbers on Vallejo paints. Have you guys ever noticed that? I've got 708004, I've got 036, I've got RAL 3012, FS 3143. So federal standard, Luftwaffe code, I suppose, I'm not sure. But for me, it's just called beige red. So get into beige red. Now I'm going to use this as a base, as a flesh colour, right? A little bit of shake up. Now I know some guys do the little ball bearing inside. I haven't done that. And you'll notice all my paints are lying down. That's because they're sitting in a tray. Now what that does do is, just over time they tend to settle on some place, but you've got to give it a good shake. And particularly with these Vallejo, you've noticed these little guys, you'll see, if you just have a look at the top there, see there's the light, there's quite a bit of, you can see that one's actually got build up on the side here because it's been lying down like this, okay, for a while. So that can be a bit of a challenge. That's one of the challenges with these darker reds, is the pigment settles in and you typically get the medium that the pigment's floating in coming out first. So you want to try and avoid that. Beige red is pretty consistent. It's a fabulous colour just in terms of its versatility, and I'm grateful for John pointing that out a few years ago. Okay, so popped out, little bubble, you can see it's already oozing out. Okay, a bit gross. Maybe a little bit too much flesh being exposed there. Now I'm just putting that into the tray. Okay, I'll come back and I'll show you that in a minute. Way too much, and you know, if I was a tidier camper, I'd wipe the top of that to make it a bit easier to seal. And one of the challenges you do have with these guys is with acrylic paints is that sealing. These little bottles, perfect. The Joe Sonia can be an absolute nightmare, trust me, to actually get that lid off. So it does take a little bit of work sometimes to clean it off. And I've made a mess here. It's all right. A little messy camper. Just let me clean that. If you ever spill acrylic paint, get it off straight away off the surface, because unless it's on a solid surface like a figure, it's going to be a nightmare, particularly on your clothes. So get it off straight away and you should be sweet. Remember, it's just a plastic polymer that's been bound in a bit of a pigment, I think. Righto, so here's Uncle named after a veteran or an older school teacher that's in the movie Journey's End, which goes with little Jimmy, who was the sleeping officer. Perfect call out for Andy Balsey in terms of that little little trench scene that he's doing. Righto, so I've got a size, just checking a size 1 brush. Now for these guys, just in terms of the base, because they're, you know, talking about size, I'm just going to use this to actually base coat. All I'm doing here, and I will actually add a couple of other things. Now I'm just going to change my glasses out to my work glasses. These are 3.5 magnification, the glasses. So I've put in the beige red. Now I'm going to pop in to this some glazed medium. I'll show you in a second how much I've got there. It's not a lot. I know one of the guys talked about having too much paint. I think that's one of the tricks that you've got to really do. You've got to avoid doing that. And another trick is to try and make sure you're deliberate in terms of where you put your varnish versus your glazed medium, because you don't want to get the two mixed up. And they are quite similar. Okay, so let me just pop those there, get some of the stuff out of the way. Let me just show you what I've got set up here. And I know this is very rudimentary. This is just the basic starting pots. Okay, so what we've got, let me get rid of that there for now. Those guys, so we've got beige red, that's the base. Okay. And we've got glazed medium, and we've got some satin varnish. And here it is on the tray. Okay, so this is the beige red. You can see there's a fair bit there. Now at the top, you've got to be careful to get a little bit of lumpiness in that, but it should be okay. This here is the glazed medium, and this is the varnish. Now, for those that saw my other palette, you'll see this is a raised section. Now, typically I wouldn't do my normal palette. That's a depressed section, and I'll always do the mixing in here and you'll always find the glaze and the varnish in that depression. This the paints I'll normally have on a ridge line around the outside, because this is a new palette. I just wanted to show you this one in action. Now you'll see this is actually reasonably thick. So what I'll do is I'll just dab a little bit of glazed medium just to thin her out there. And that's sort of where I'm going. Now I'm not going to use that varnish until I start working the top layers. For now I'm just getting the base colour in. I'm just being a little bit more deliberate in this than I normally am. I'm just thinning that out a little bit. Righto, let's come back and get me my both hands working. Hi Glenn, thought you off to work, mate. And hello Max and Mark, good to see you guys. And of course, sorry I woke you up early, Susie B. It wasn't actually me, it was the alarm, I thought, that woke you up. Yeah, the fire alarm went off this morning while I was doing my morning ablutions, for those that missed that earlier start. Righto, so size 1, nice thin paint, forgetting something here, on the top, and away we go. Now all I'm going to do, Johannes, I'm not going to do much more on the wet palette other than that, mate. I think it's an important part of this process. Now I'm doing this because I want to check a few little floor marks that I haven't addressed on this figure yet. And I would actually normally start, I know there's some stuff that I'm not happy with on this little guy, so I need to sort those out. And that's one of the reasons for using the base. It will actually reveal some little imperfections. Okay, and this is not solidly coating. Ooh. The stand failed. Okay, you might have seen that happening. I was a little bit focusing on that one, and that blue tack came down like nobody's business. Okay, Johannes, I'll answer your question later on for sure, mate. So you just post that there and I'll be on board. Let me come back to just a safer position for the Kiwi tripod. Okay, what else could go wrong? Let's just pop this into here. So figure and hands, I will always paint them at the same time to try and get the a balance in the colours. Although the hands, arms, legs tend to be a little bit different from the face, obviously because it's the most exposed part of the body. And remember that the primary reason I'm putting this base on now is is to actually reveal those imperfections that I want to be able to fix up. This has got a little, he's got a little lead foil helmet strap that Andy's popped on the back, so I'm just going to lift that up so I can get underneath that properly, hopefully without breaking it. Yep. Now what I'll do is I will study this a little bit later on. Now hey, here's one tip for you. You saw me adding the glaze before. Now if I use the flesh just straight out of the bottle, what I'll find is it won't take long before it gets a little bit, starts to dry, gets a little bit of tension in it. And I have been known to and will actually fill little imperfections with a thicker part. So if I go to the side that I haven't put glaze on, it's already started to bind up, it's already started to set, and I'll use that to fill tiny little holes, for example, or little gaps, and I can see straight away, yeah, a little bit of extra stuff in there. I'll actually use that to fill those up. And here's another tip with that, because of that thickness, that's actually what I use for beard areas, and I'll actually use that to actually build up a slight dappled texture or spotty texture to actually show a beard area. Okay, now immediately as soon as I've got this on here, what I can see is I can see little potentially areas of fluff that I might have popped on, or as I was sort of cleaning it up, got caught, or maybe when Andy did the base coat, did the primer, so he primed these figures with a car primer. There's some little trapped grains of something which I will remove as part of this. Okay, and look, that's all I'm going to do today. Clean the brush, okay, clean myself. Let's go through the 3 things that I did want to cover off, as opposed to the 3 things I didn't want to cover off. Okay, so today what we looked at, we did that little introduction. We talked about the Tommy's figure. We talked about the wet palette from yesterday. You'll see that just a little bit of a preamble, waiting for people to come on board. Then we started talking about paints, and I think the key thing here is it doesn't matter what paint you've got. I think the key is to understand that you use different colors and different mixes, and you experiment with those to get the mix that you actually want to come through. Okay, I went through, I showed you the Matisse that I liked, and then a range of Joe Sonia's that I typically use, but I do blend that in. That's annoying, isn't it? I blend that in with either the Citadel Games Workshop or the model color. Now if I had more readily available colors like Andrea or Scale Model, I'd certainly be getting those two as part of it. And one of the reasons, just to experiment, and what I'm looking at with a paint is I'm looking at how easy it is to flow. So I'm looking at flow, I'm looking at the consistency, you know, is it creamy, is it milky, how do I use that? And the other part, which we might talk on a little bit later, is it can become a little bit lumpy and grainy. So that's what we talked about. We talked about the different types of paint, and we focused on flesh. So we exposed a little bit about flesh. A couple of key things to pick up there. You know, you use a base that will be a neutral tone. That's the primary area of the paint, of the face, of the hands, etc. And then you actually use colors like the red to bring a bit of light in, and you use colors like yellow oxide, burnt sienna, and sap green to provide that sort of tanny tone. And shadows are done not with black, they are done with things like Payne's grey, burnt umber, or raw umber. That just provides that shadow area cover. You use black if you want to show soot, if you want to show dirt. Hopefully that was useful. Really neat to see you. Got a couple of others just as a closing out. I want to say hi to, I think I said hi to Mark. Another Mark. I want to say hi to Torsten. Thanks very much for joining me. Scott. Okay. Awesome to see you here. And young Gavin Dodd. Man, what an inspiration you are with the way your paintings come along, mate. Love that work that you've been doing. And hey guys, thanks very much for today. Remember, this is Mike the Kiwi saying goodbye, and I'll see you next weekend. Take care.